Good morning, Washington, D.C. Good afternoon, Paris. And good early evening in Beirut, where we have two guests joining us for the 24th E-Policy Circle of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. This is going to be a fantastic gathering, virtual gathering on the eve of Thanksgiving in the United States. Happy Thanksgiving for those in the US watching us. And we have, of course, you know, the background of each of our distinguished guests, but we have Their Excellencies, Elliott Abrams, Dorothy Shea, and Gurvan Le Bras, and of course, Fouad Makhzoumi from Beirut. As usual, I will do the 4 minutes to each of the participants. Hopefully, we will have the engaged conversation on all the points that will be laid by each of the distinguished guests. And then we will conclude with a minute or two so that we know what each wants us to walk away with. So I'll start with Elliott Abrams. Please, you have the 4 minutes to you. Kindly begin.
Well, thank you very much, Raghia. It's great to be with you. I wish we were able to be doing this in person. Needless to say, we are on the verge of big political changes here in Washington, and we are very concerned about the events of the last year and the coming year in the Middle East, not least in Lebanon. And Lebanon has certainly attracted a lot of attention in the US, partly for the events that are, let us say, in domestic politics in Lebanon, but also, of course, my own portfolio, which is Iran. And our concern has been that Lebanese have not been able to make their own decisions about the future of their country because of the very heavy hand of Hezbollah and the heavy hand of Iran that we see. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion of US policy toward Iran. I would say first, we have one president at a time, and our policy today will be exactly the same through January 20th. It is a policy of maximum pressure, and I would announce today something that we will announce here in Washington later. We are sanctioning 4 entities today for their activities in promoting Iran's missile program. These are 4 entities in China and Russia for the transfer of technology to Iran to develop its missile program. I'd say one other thing about US policy toward Iran. There is a view, I think, that a new administration can come in and turn a switch. It's like a light switch. No JCPOA, then we turn on the JCPOA. And I would say to you that that's not so simple. That for one thing, there are a number of governments around the world, not just in Europe, but this time in the Middle East. Certainly Israel, the Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, that have a real concern about these negotiations with Iran and that are going to want to have their own say. Things have changed since 2015 in the Middle East, in Lebanon, and really in every country, certainly in Iran. For example, changed in the Iranian nuclear program. They are now violating the JCPOA. Some of the sunsets, the first were 5 years, well, we're past 5 years. So that has to be negotiated as well. I don't think this idea that you flick a switch works. And my own view is that a real renegotiation, even if you wish to return to the JCPOA, will take many months. And I've noticed some comments by the French foreign minister to the effect that a kind of, what should we say, automatic return to the JCPOA is not right. And that there are many other concerns that France and others in Europe have about, for example, Iran's role in the Middle East in support of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, its role in Syria, that definitely need to be discussed. So those who think this is a very simple bit back to the JCPOA are going to, I think, be quite surprised. I may have used up my 4 minutes, so let me just stop at that point.
Let me do a quick follow-up with you, though, before I move on. The four entities, are they governmental entities? Are they, can you tell us the names? And you said it's related to transfer of technology. Go ahead, give me the names first, Elliott Abrams, please.
It's the Chengdu Best New Materials Company and the Zibo Elim Trade Company, which are both in China, the Nilco Group, and Elikon, which are in Russia, transferring sensitive technology and items to Iran's missile program.
Okay, so but this is then, this is not related to the resumption of potentially, the resumption of selling arms to Iran, meaning the Chinese and the Russians, because I understand that you have another set of sanctions ready for that, right? I just want to make sure that
we will have next week and the week after and the week after, all through December and January, there will be sanctions that deal with arms, that deal with weapons of mass destruction, that deal with human rights. We'll have additional human rights sanctions. Yes, so this will continue on for another couple of months, right until the end.
Okay, Elliott Abrams, I suppose we will get back to you to see how much of that will be related to Iran, Hezbollah, because in Lebanon we care a lot about what happens to the sanctions from now till January 20th, and that's why we're going to go to Dorothy Shea, who is your ambassador, U.S. ambassador in Lebanon. Dorothy Shea, 4 minutes to you, please.
Thank you, Rahida, for the opportunity to participate in today's discussion. And it's an honor for me also to be on a panel with Elliott Abrams, who was my former boss. The title of your session is very poignant right now for Lebanon, and I'd like to drill down a bit to that aspect of the question. We are in the midst of a deepening economic crisis, and I've actually noted before that maybe the word crisis doesn't quite capture the gravity of the situation. So I don't know, I'd like to have a discussion how we could better describe it, perhaps catastrophe or something else, but clearly we are in dire straits. And on top of that, of course, Lebanon is facing stalemate in the government formation process. Combine that with the COVID-19 pandemic and against the backdrop of the August 4th Beirut port explosion, we have, I fear, the makings of a toxic cocktail that will carry profound implications for individual Lebanese and their families, not to mention the economy and potentially beyond in the region. So in your talk here about who authors the future, I'd like to underscore some of the issues that I believe will be essential to Lebanon's recovery as we try to reinforce US policy priorities here. Now, first and foremost, Lebanon urgently needs reforms. And by that, I mean implementation of serious and far-reaching reforms to get the economy back on track. This is imperative to restore the confidence, first of all, of the Lebanese people in their own government and leaders, but also beyond internationally in the economy. So also, we really need this to restore investor confidence and unlock international assistance. But before these reforms can happen, Lebanon needs to have an empowered government. So the stalled government formation process prevents the undertaking of real reforms, some of which would generate much needed revenues that are so desperately needed to meet the basic needs of Lebanon's citizens. Now, 3 months into a caretaker government that lacks authority to take these decisions, I'm sorry to say, I don't detect a sense of urgency on the part of Lebanon's political leaders, notwithstanding the efforts of the international community, whether the United States for our part, or France, or others. And I hope you saw that the International Support Group for Lebanon is putting out a statement today that addresses these urgent needs for concrete action. So the United States has made clear our steadfast commitment to Lebanon as the country faces these multifaceted challenges. And just to tick off a couple statistics about our assistance, we put our money where our mouth is. In 2019 alone, the United States provided over $750 million in assistance, and that was some of it security assistance, economic assistance, and humanitarian. This year, 2020, we provided approximately $41 million to help mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and about $31 million to help meet immediate needs after the port explosion. At the same time, we've made clear our commitment to using policy tools, and this gets to what Elliott Abrams was saying, including sanctions and conditionality on assistance to the government to promote accountability and to make clear that there will be no bailouts. Business as usual must end. So the recent sanctioning under the Global Magnitsky Act of Gibran Bassil represents just one example of how we are promoting accountability and, more importantly, standing with the Lebanese people against, I've heard the term used, merchant politicians. I'm talking about leaders who betray the people they're supposed to be serving by engaging in corruption or enabling Hezbollah and its terrorist agenda. In this time, especially when the country is in absolute crisis, it is unthinkable that politicians would put their own interests or those of their parties ahead of the country. So in my interaction with government, with Lebanese of all stripes, I consistently hear people want a Lebanon that is sovereign, prosperous, enjoying peace in the region. That is the future they are trying to author.
All right, thank you very much, but I need a couple of quick follow-ups. You mentioned the Gibran Bassil and the sanctions against Gibran Bassil, and you also sort of accused him of, running away from the truth, if not lying. You said that he was interested in breaking with Hezbollah, and so sort of something has happened that something's obviously that we don't know. He says, prove it. He thinks that it's because of Hezbollah ties that you sanctioned him rather than because of corruption. So what's going on? What happened between you and Gibran Bassil? Why don't we know the whole story?
Well, typically, we keep conversations that are held at a diplomatic level.
But you didn't.
In confidence. I spoke out because he had mischaracterized several things, taken some of our conversations out of context, clearly in a self-serving way. Now, the United States has made no secret that what our views are of Hezbollah as an organization. As a terrorist organization, as an organization that does not promote transparency or accountability. So we've been very clear on that. And we think this alliance between the FPM and Hezbollah has not served the people of Lebanon very well. I will make no secret about that either. All that being said, Gibran Bassil was sanctioned under authorities of the Global Magnitsky Act. He might have been surprised by that, but the implication was somehow that I had a duty to tell him that ahead of time, which I did not. Did we have conversations about the relationship between the party he heads and Hezbollah? Yes. And was he close to the point where he was ready to throw in the towel? Yes. And as I said previously on the record, he even thanked me and the United States for making him confront those hard realities.
We're going to discuss that further, and I want to also ask you about something you mentioned twice when you spoke of the stalemate in the formation of the government. Actually, let me get that through because I don't want to lose sight of that. You seem to be blaming Saad al-Hariri, and probably he is not going to be able to form a government without Hezbollah. So is he next on your sanctions list? Is it time that he steps out, especially that the 17th of October people march didn't want him to come back? This is to both of you, Elliott Abrams and Dorothy Shea. But Dorothy Shea first.
The United States is not blaming any one person, and we were never quite in the position of focusing on exact personalities and the composition of the future government. Rather, I think it's an indictment on the political class as a whole that I haven't detected, as I said, any sense of urgency. The country is in crisis. The country desperately needs a government that can start making these decisions and implementing them.
So should he defer or step out? Like right away? Is there a timeline?
No, we never put a deadline on them, but it needs to happen, and it needs to happen urgently. Now, with regard to your question about sanctions, there's been a lot of speculation in the media about the United States having a sanctions list and there's 24 people on it or 22, and different accounts have different numbers. In fact, I have nothing to announce in that regard. There are a number of files that have been looked at in Washington that continue to be looked at by those who are specialists in reviewing the applicability of our sanctions authorities. And I can't preview who might be next, but there are files that are in preparation under authorities that have to do with counterterrorism and under the authorities that were used against Gurvan Bassil against corruption.
All right, thank you very much. I will go now to Gurvan Le Bras, and excuse me, I made you wait too long. 4 minutes to you, please.
No problem. Thank you very much, Farida. Well, since 4 minutes will be very short to enter into the details of each and every situation that has been raised until now, let me start with more general considerations. And of course, as the deputy head of the French policy planning, I will not be able to offer you an official perspective, but rather give you a taste of how we perceive and discuss these issues in the ministry in Paris. So our headline was stability redefined. I don't know if we need to redefine stability, but we sure need to achieve more stability in the region right now. So that's an important goal, and that we all share, I think. But it's also a specific perspective for France and Europe because it's our own security that is at stake. Of course, not as much as it is for the very people of the region, naturally, but a bit more maybe than other big powers that are also convened to contribute to the settlement of the crisis in the region. You only have to mention the fact that in the past years in Europe, the instability in the region have provoked consequences on our soil. Terrorism, migration, but also other threats, namely a more maybe diffuse one, the threat of proliferation of mass destruction weapons. And all of this, of course, having to do with a broader diagnosis of weakening of the states due to many factors. And I won't go into the detail, of course, because we don't have time. Maybe just a few considerations. What we are, the reasons, the root causes of these instabilities, we need to tackle them, and that is important to remember that we're not only dealing with the manifestation of the crisis, but also have to deal with the root causes. There are strategic mutations in the region. There are changes in the balance of force. Of course, there are many reasons for that. There is a changing profile of the US policy in the longer run in the past, let's say, 10 years. This has led to the rise of other actors that are more determined to make use of coercive action to pursue their objectives. In the face of this, we need to adapt our own ways of responding to these challenges. Arab Springs happened 10 years ago. Many of the root causes remain. The issue of Lebanon that has been discussed among us a few minutes ago only is also a case in point in terms of social contracts and the limits of some development models. Dorothy mentioned corruption. This is very important to find responses for that. One word to say that I would completely share what she said about the fact that we are not going to move ahead in Lebanon by identifying personal responsibilities. In fact, it's rather a collective responsibility, and the more you enter into a characterization of single responsibilities, the more you fuel the communitarian game in Lebanon, and that's not what we want to do. One word, just if I only have 1 minute, just getting back to...
your sound is not, sorry, your sound.
The sound?
Something went wrong with your sound.
Oh, sorry.
We lost you. We lost your sound. Can you try to fix it? I will get back to you. Can you say something now?
Is it okay now?
Yes, it is okay, but I want you have to wrap up because I need to,
What I can do is only just one sentence.
Yes.
Well, getting back to Elliott on his mention of our diagnosis on the Iran threats, I think it's completely true that we definitely share the same objectives as the US in terms of making sure that the different layers of the Iranian threat in the region, whether it be proliferation or regional behavior, needs to be tackled. But we definitely disagree on the way to achieve this, and don't think that that sanctions can achieve that objective in that specific context. I think it's rather a question of security architecture, and that there's something we can work on it. There are things are moving in that perspective, and you are completely right, Excellency, to mention the fact that if and when we move on to a different dynamics with that regard, then we'll have to tackle the things with a much broader agenda.
Okay, I definitely want to discuss that when we go into the larger discussion, specifically about, how do you make sure that the mistake that was made by the Obama administration is not repeated by a Biden administration, which was a mistake from our point of view in this region, that to let Iran get away with insisting on excluding the regional behavior from the nuclear negotiations. I hold that thought also, Elliott Abrams, because I want to get back to what to Gurvan Le Bras. He's trying to say that now they're going to have policy that I'm sure you're going to have to answer him on this during the exchange. But before we leave Lebanon on this one, Gurvan Le Bras, didn't President Macron come and say and promised to have sanctions on the Lebanese who failed the initiative or who block it? And then there's been this walking back from that continuously by Paris. Is this still on the table? Is Paris at all interested in the sanctioning of people who are obstructing the initiative, as President Macron said here in Lebanon? Or is this now a new game with the Biden administration coming in? Short answer, please, because I have to go to Mr. Mahzoum.
Yes, of course, very short. I think the question is not whether we are still interested in sanctioning. The question is, are we still interested in trying to move ahead the issue? And I can confirm that, of course, there is still that notion that emergency is there and that it's possible for us, but of course not us alone. There needs to be commitment by the whole international community to make a difference in the current very, very dire crisis that we have in Lebanon, and which is multifaceted. So we are going to maybe try to make the best use of that sense of trying to, like Dorothy said, trying to recreate at the international level a sense of urgency and a sense of to solve the issue.
I still didn't get the answer to my question. The sanctions is still on the table as promised by President Macron, or this is off the table? Just like, because I didn't understand.
I think that the global approach that he proposes on the whole is all on the table. It's not about sanctions alone. It's just a general approach.
Thank you very much. Fouad Makhzoumi, please, 4 minutes to you, and apologies for coming to you a bit late, but we still have a lot of time. 4 minutes to you. And please work with me, everybody. That when I signal with my hands, work with me a little bit on the timing. I would very much appreciate it. Thank you. Fouad Makhzoumi, 4 minutes to you.
Thank you, Raghida, and happy Easter to all of our American friends.
Thank you.
Really, since the inception of Hezbollah in the 80s, there has been an intention by Iran to control Lebanon, to have a coup d'etat, and to have borders on the Mediterranean. It started with the assassination of Prime Minister Hariri. They appointed at that point the Speaker of the House. Then in 2010, they removed Hariri and they brought Najib Mikati, and they started controlling the prime ministership. From 2011 to 2016, they got involved in every single appointment, judicial system, security forces, and everything. 2016, they made sure they will get their own president. So from that point onward, really, it was a total coup d'etat. And in order to legitimize this thing, because especially after the sanctions started in 2015, 2016, as Elliott Abrams said, definitely they wanted to have a law, which is 2017 election law, that gave them that legitimacy, because they decided to appoint who is the prime minister, who is the speaker, who is the president. And really, they thought life is fantastic. And they decided to create that famous formula that Ambassador Shea referred to in previous speech, whereby she said there was the golden formula. The arms of Hezbollah, the corruption of Hezbollah versus the power given to the other safety network that was created by Hezbollah by having the strong Sunni, Hariri, having the strong Shiite, which is Nabi Berri, having the strong Druze, Walid Jumblat, and Michel Aoun as the strong Maronites, in order to really control the country. 17th of October came, and I agree with Ambassador Shea, because what she said is absolutely correct. Because, as much as we all thought that this corrupted class should have at least a minimum human feelings for the people that elected them, and they have proven that really they don't give a damn for all of this. And what happened after that, they all retracted. Now, where do we go from here? And I believe the sanctions that were put on Hezbollah within the package of against Iran is very important, it's very critical for the changes. But in order to move forward, Hezbollah, after the sanctions started being implemented against Iran and Hezbollah, they looked internally to try to generate the missing funding that was stopped by the sanctions. And this was the port, the airport, and the illegal points of entry between Lebanon and Syria. Unfortunately, the biggest crime that happened in Lebanon on 4th of August destroyed the port. But that means we still have to control the airport. We have still to control the borders with Syria. And this is where we propose that the international community, through IATA, start putting the restrictions and to be really involved in the security of the airport of Beirut. This is one. Secondly, there was discussion that we expand the mandate for the UNIFIL in order to control the borders with Syria. At the end of the day, this claim that we're stopping the terrorists coming in, yes, but we want to make sure that we stop the terrorists coming into the Lebanon, but at the same time, we want to stop the illegal funding that comes into the Lebanon that finances the situation where we are in, that's undermining the institution of government. If we want to go further than that, we are a parliamentarian system. Parliamentarian system, it means we have to have control of the parliament. In 2018, everybody, blessed Lebanon because it was a clear election. We all know it was fixed by Hezbollah and their allies. And I'm one of the people that suffered. I lost 2 at 12 hours after the election. But at the end of the day, we need to have the control. We believe the people of the 17th of October are willing to go ahead. They are willing to make the change. And if we put the sanctions on all politicians before the elections, then the people will know exactly who stole the money and who destroyed their country. As far as the reference point of Ambassador Shea for the cabinet, I agree with her 100%. But my advice, let us not go back to the old corrupted class, rebrand them in order to form reforms for the future.
Thank you very much, Fouad Makhzoumi. I know my follow-up to you is going to be actually taking a point that you made and taking it to the others. So there is a proposal, I mean, the airport. Is this a sort of thing, Elliott Abrams, that the US is thinking about, or how independent is the focus on sanctions against Iran from sanctions against Hezbollah, from sanctions against the political leaders and what the corrupt class? And I will combine that with a question I got from the audience for the American speaker. So that goes to both Elliott Abrams first and then Dorothy Shea. It says, why is Gibran Bassil sanctioned by the US and not Saad Hariri or Nabi Berri, who are, from what they say, even more corrupt and also effective partners in power with Hezbollah? Is the US having the usual double standard at play again? That's Elliott Abrams. That's not my question. Somebody who wants to know what you think about that.
I think that the first thing to say is that Fouad Makhzoumi was exactly right in describing what happened here. The United States put increasingly effective sanctions on Iran. So this means that they had less cash to give Hezbollah. What does Hezbollah do? It says, well, first, remember last year, Nasrallah actually made a public appeal for donations to Hezbollah, but they also try to squeeze more money out of the areas they control. And one of the critical areas they control is the port and the airport. Now, what exactly are the effective ways of diminishing its control? that is a question I would actually turn to Ambassador Dorothy Shea, because it's a hard question, and it does require not that Saad Hariri act, but that everybody act. And this is a critical point. When people went to the streets of Lebanon, they were shouting, "Enough is enough." And they were talking about the whole political class. They were not selecting out one individual or another. They were looking at the political elites and saying, you have failed us. But this is clearly related to the US sanctions on Iran, because they have squeezed a number of the groups that are receiving funds from Iran, and they are receiving less. We can see the Iranian budget go down. But for a more detailed answer on the airport, I would turn to the ambassador.
All right, go ahead, Ambassador Dorothy Shea.
Yes, thank you for that. By our conservative estimate, looking at government statistics, we believe the government is deprived of at least $500 million a year in what should have been coming in as customs revenues, whether at the port or airport or land borders. So that is money that's not going into government coffers. And so no wonder the government is not able to provide and meet the needs of its citizens. So absolutely, some cleaning up is in order. And I have made the argument among colleagues here in Beirut and back in Washington and among my counterparts in the diplomatic community that as horrific as the port explosion was, it does potentially represent an opportunity to hit the reset button, because we do not want to go back to the old corrupt ways of doing business at the port. And I believe some kind of formula of privatization will help clean up the act there. And I believe to get the support of the international community, it's going to need to be squeaky clean. And I would apply that same standard, whether at the airport or at land borders as well.
And do you care to answer the question that was put to you both from somebody from the audience about Mr. Saad Hariri and Nabi Berri?
Look, I understand that people are frustrated with political leaders, and some people rejoiced and some people were really angry when Gibran Bassil was designated. And the same could be said for backers of politicians of all stripes, I'm sure. I'm not going to say who may or who may not be sanctioned. I don't know, quite honestly. This all depends on evidentiary standards that people back in Washington review. But anyone who has been engaging in massive corruption, or anyone who aids and abets a terrorist organization, should review their actions and consider the implications.
Gurvan Le Bras, you don't think so? You think that we need to really separate these two things? I mean, the French policy is very different from the American policy in this regard, that no, we have to accommodate, we have to live with it, we have to make it work. Well, so far it has not really succeeded. Unfortunately, we all were hoping that your initiative will succeed. And we counted actually on the fact that there may be sanctions in order so that your initiative is taken seriously, your efforts are taken seriously. And here we are, back to square one, and the country, well, like Dorothy Shea said, it's catastrophically in a catastrophe. Go ahead, please. Can you tell me what on earth are you waiting for? And what is the sky the limit here? I mean, how long do you wait?
I think there are several questions in that. I think the first one is, do you achieve your results by, is it more efficient to achieve your objectives to use sanctions or to threat of sanctions? But if you keep on threatening of sanctions but don't actually sanction, then of course the threat is losing leverage. So we need to be careful on that. We don't think that, for example, sanctioning the actors right now would answer the different. Would lead to some kind of way forward in terms of I mean, who's going to make a government if all are sanctioned? The fact that you have members of the government sanctioned by Washington, for example, hasn't really changed the course of action of the Lebanese political forces so far. So it's not just, maybe probably one single approach is going to fail, but an approach that is able to combine the different layers would work. And one note on the idea of fighting corruption, I think we can all agree on that. But the thing is, what about the deepness, the depth of the confessional system in the society? If it's about sanctioning the way the system has been functioning in the past years, then who is going to escape the accusation of corruption? So
right. I'm going to take this point to Fouad Makhzoumi. I'm sure he's got a lot to say about that. Fouad Makhzoumi, please go ahead.
Well, I have to disagree with our French colleague, because at the end of the day, this corrupted group has been around for 27 years. And they have been manipulating the government. They have in control of every single level of the government, from government employees to judicial system to security forces. So when the people went to the street on the 17th of October objecting, they were shot at. Was there any kind of support for the people that were shot at by the international community or judicial system? Yes, there was a lot of verbal talk, which is fantastic, but at the end of the day, this discouraged the people. When we try to say, at the end of the day, we need a change, and these people are controlling the parliament. At the end of the day, we all know in the parliamentarian system, if you do not have the majority to make change, what is democracy? And what we have had today a discussion in the parliament about election laws, there is no way in hell. Hezbollah and Harakat Amal, they are insisting on trying to have a law that will weaken the Christians in this country. They will be in control, and they would like to go for this. So unless we have sanctions in order to restrain these people from abusing the system and to try to ask them to step aside for the youth to change, I would disagree with our French colleague, because at the end of the day, they will win again and again, and then all the so-called plans for reform will be difficult. The other point where we disagree, first of all, I appreciate very much what President Macron have done, because really they were the first one that stepped in after the 4th of August to help us. But you cannot go back to the corrupted people that the people rejected them on 17th October and ask them to rebrand themselves and to lead reform. If we are saying we would like to have a change, yes, let's have the change. What was wrong by having a cabinet that's totally independent, without Hezbollah, without Hariri, without Berri, without Aoun, and allow them for six months to 9 months to make the change? Because if we are successful, then everybody is successful. But you cannot choose one and tell the others you have to sit outside, because this is unfortunately our bad system that we have to stick to for the time being until we change the government, the parliament. And at that point, I agree with you, we need to move to a civil society which is away from the sectarian divide.
Thank you, Fouad Makhzoumi. I need to move to a question from someone who's listening to us, and they are informing me that the Iran court just issued an execution order of an EU citizen hostage, Ahmed Riza Jalali. Will the United States and the Europeans take any action, any form of action toward putting an end to the Iranian hostage-taking foreign policy? This is a question that I just received. It goes to you, Elliott Abrams.
This is a terrible case, of Jalali, and there have been appeals by governments in Europe, the Swedes in this case taking the lead, and you see the reaction. You see the reaction of the regime, which is essentially to say, "Shut up, go away." My answer to this is they don't listen to humanitarian appeals. The only thing they understand is pressure. And so I would hope that the Europeans would, frankly, make them pay a price if they go ahead with this. This follows by a matter of weeks of the execution of Navid Afkari, the wrestler. And there was a global effort. But it isn't enough to say, oh, this is terrible. For example, in the case of Afkari, it should be followed by banning Iran's participation in world sporting events, including the Olympics. In the case of Jalali, the question is, what will the Europeans do? What we hear is a lot of criticism of the American sanctions, but I would argue that those sanctions actually have an effect in Tehran. They care about that. They know what it's doing to their economy. So words are great. They are a start, and then action.
Elliott Abrams, stay with me on the issue of sanctions here. You have been leading the policy of the US policy towards Iran and towards on Venezuela. And you've been somehow, at least the way I read you and heard you speak, you've been urging the Biden administration to sort of build on the sanctions policy that the Trump administration has pursued. And you're saying this is good for the United States of America. This is about national security. This is about relationships with our partners in the region. Are you worried? Are you that worried that they're going to the Biden team is going to just jump back and say, we hate everything that Trump did, that Trump team did, and we're going to reverse its effect? So you look like you're in a hurry to give a lot of sanctions to cripple their ability to jump back into the JCPOA. And whereas there are talks, and tell me if you've heard any such rumors or any such information, that the Biden team has been negotiating secretly with the Iranians, and that the Iranians are feeling pretty good about what's going on. Elliott Abrams.
Thank you. I would say first that I don't think they're negotiating with Iran. It's illegal, actually, under American law for them to be doing this. And I am really quite confident that they are not doing it. These are very sober and responsible people. I think there are a lot of people who claim to speak for them, who, former officials who say, oh, I have the inside track, believe me, I know this guy and I know that guy. And it's very misleading. On the lifting of the sanctions, there are processes. Take, for example, Gibran Basil. This was Magnitsky Act. There is a process for lifting. You cannot just come in and say, I sign here and this is gone. It has to be reviewed. If you have counterterrorism sanctions, then you have to ask, well, is this person involved or not involved in terrorism? So I do not think that they will lift the sanctions in one day. I tell you what I do fear, that people will expect this and will expect that the sanctions will not be enforced. And if people think they won't be enforced, then you begin to see a change in their willingness to abide by the sanctions. Then you begin to see bankers, corporate executives, lawyers saying, well, maybe we don't have to abide by them if there will be no follow-up and no enforcement. That I worry about.
Okay, again, I got lots of questions to you, Elliott Abrams, and basically it's again the good old thing. What prevents the United States from doing a deal with Iran during the Biden administration? There's a lot of concern that people, according to this particular answer, that Iran is giving the hints that there will be a deal, and basically what will not happen is to include in the New Deal the dimension that I spoke about earlier, and that the French presidency supported in its position, which is that there must be an inclusion of the behavior, the regional behavior of Iran in any New Deal. You and I were in Washington, Elliott Abrams, and you gave me the impression that should they give in on the ballistic missiles and on the nuclear issue, the regional behavior will drop. Go for it.
Yes, look, I think, and I've said this before, Aida, there will be a negotiation next year. There would be no matter who was president. We have a lot of leverage. And I think there would have been an agreement under Trump, and there will, I think, be an agreement under Biden. The question is, what's in the agreement? And what we need to do is to use the leverage that has been built up over these years of sanctions, use it to make sure that, for example, these regional issues, the missile questions, become part of the agreement. What I mean is, if you lift all the sanctions to get back to a nuclear agreement only, then you have eliminated your leverage. And then you go to Iran and say, now we want to do a deal on missiles and on support for terrorist groups. And they will say, well, too bad, we don't. So it would be a mistake to discard this leverage and not use it to insist not only on missiles, but regional conduct and, of course, the nuclear file.
Okay. In one sentence only, Elliott Abrams, are you confident with the new team announced by the Biden administration in control of foreign policy? Like, for example, Jake Sullivan was one of the people who did speak, who was involved in the secret talks with Iran during the time, the era of President Obama, which, you know, I mean, let's be practical about this. Go for it.
Okay, in one sentence.
Yes, two.
I know Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. They're terrific people. The question is whether they have learned, in my view, learned from the mistakes that the Obama administration made in those negotiations with Iran, and whether they realize that it is not 2015, it will be 2021, and they have to build on what we have learned since then.
Thank you. Let me go to Dorothy Shea and ask you a quick question, but for what somebody wanted to know, if would the sanctions reach a point where the US government might stop US aid programs in Lebanon? That's like a very quick yes or no, please, because I have another question for you. Dorothy Shea?
There are times when the US administration needs to defend our assistance programs for Lebanon. So it's not something that I take for granted. This is something that we have to be held accountable for. These are taxpayers' dollars that we are spending here in the millions of dollars, as I described earlier. But I'm very confident in my ability to work with our trusted partners with whom we work very closely in carrying out our programs to defend Lebanon's sovereignty, to build the prospects for prosperity among the people here. And I will continue to defend that in Washington as well.
Dorothy Shea, about the demarcation and the talks with, there are talks, technical talks or otherwise, between the Lebanese and the Israelis on the demarcation. What do you expect for those? Where are they? Are they going to be, some people say this is definitely going to be the gateway to normalization. What do you have on that, please?
Well, I do see it as a sign of hope, a glimmer of hope, let's say, that is out there. And I believe that both sides are motivated. There's a lot at stake here. And we're prepared to do our part as mediators to help the sides get to the point where they can agree on a maritime demarcation. Now, both sides are going to have to demonstrate that seriousness if they're going to get there. And it's not going to be easy. There's going to have to be some give and take. And we're just going to have to watch and wait and see. But I firmly believe, and I heard it directly from people who got the instruction from on high on the Lebanese side, that their mandate was to get an agreement and to get it quickly. So I wish them success, and we'll do our part as mediators.
I'm going to go to Fouad Makhzoumi and then get back to Gurvan Le Bras, because I want to go back to this issue of renegotiating the JCPOA and the regional behavior. I mean, whether there is any thinking, or there must be a way to absolutely have it as part and parcel of a new agreement, the regional matter, the regional behavior of Iran, and including Syria, including Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. But let me go to Fouad Makhzoumi, because I want to conclude on Lebanon with you, Fouad Makhzoumi. Is this a lost case? I mean, is the future of this country doomed? Is it over? What do we tell people who are watching us right now?
Lebanon has survived for thousands of years. As you know, for the last 200 years, every 10, 15 years, we have a group of sectarian group that decide to take over the country. And then at the end of the day, the others will go get the support from the region and then try to change it. Lebanon, it's the only country went to civil war and came back as one country. This is an opportunity that we can all work together in order to be part of the region and to be part of to live together. When when the issue about what the ambassador said, we, irrespective whether we will do normalization now or in the future, We need to finish the demarcation for one simple reason. We need to take out any excuse for Hezbollah to claim that there is a reason why they should keep their arms. The sooner we can get this demarcation done, the sooner we can try to say this is done. If there is anything which is left, let's take it to the international courts in order to solve it. This is one problem. The second problem, we cannot at all think that this country is without, beyond redemption. We all the time went to civil war, unfortunately, but we came out of it. My suggestion, we internally, we cannot do this change on our own. We need help. And when I see that the United States, the Gulf, France, and all of them are showing the goodwill, then we are willing to work with them. But you cannot come back to us and telling us, guess what? Look, I don't care about sanctions. What we will do, we will use the same people that have stolen your money, that corrupted your system, they refuse to reform, and we will try to work with them in order to make the change. My suggestion is that we all work together to really open the door for the younger generation, for the people of the 17th of October, in order to make the change. And the last point for our French colleague. The French initiative wanted Saad al-Hariri to be the prime minister. Saad al-Hariri is against forensic audit. Saad al-Hariri does not want to touch the central bank. Saad al-Hariri doesn't want to try to work with the banking, with the reforms, because he owns a bank which was part of that corrupted system. My suggestion, my dear friend, we love France. We have very good historical relationship with you. We would like to develop a regional cooperation with you, but please try to see what the people want, not what should be forced on the people that you're coming from outside.
So I need to absolutely go to Gurvan Le Bras on this one, and please address the points made to you by Fouad Makhzoumi, and also tell me if you know anything about the investigations regarding the explosion of the port, because between the FBI investigation and the French investigation, I don't think, and with the corruption of everybody here in Lebanon, including all the insurance companies, and we have to have a case against them, a legal case against them, because without closure of these investigations, we do not build our homes. So, Gurvan Le Bras.
Thank you.
And you have we have 8 minutes left, that's including the wrap up. So I'm going to let you wrap up with that, please, also.
Sure, no problem. I can do that. Let me be clear to Excellency Fouad Makhzoumi. Our goal is not choosing what government is needed for Lebanon. Our goal is to have a government in order to achieve reform, because we think that we're not going to choose the way Lebanon is supposed to find the path it's supposed to find to get out of the crisis. But logically, we see and we understand, and we've been understanding for years, that it would take a lot of reform, and there is not just about us, it's also the IMF and so on. So that any government that would be able to do that is going to be good enough for us. I mean, we don't want to choose. So that's the first, of course, the first indication, and also respond to the question you made on Saad al-Hariri. We don't see that that one specific actor should be better than the other, or less worse, or whoever. I mean, it's not for us to choose. Who are we going to put in place of those that actually running de facto the country, running the banks and so on? I don't know. Does it take to get that financial reform to replace all the current banks that detain assets for the Lebanese debt, or to try to get them to in the common solution for that and the new schedules? I don't know. I think there are different options, and we're not going to choose the one option over the other, because it's not our role to do that. And the last point on that would be, I completely agree that most probably the convergence, not most probably, obviously the convergence of our priority and our vision is greater with the movement of October than with the traditional forces, and I think that the diagnosis of situation is the appropriate one. But it's not for us to say what forces should drive the future of the country. I would be happy if it was those, but it's not for me to say.
Thank you very much, Gurvan Le Bras. Because time is running out, not running up. I'm going to consider that as your closing statement. I'm going to go to Dorothy Shea for her closing statement, and then I'm going to, I think, end with Elliott Abrams because I think we are short on time. Go ahead, Dorothy Shea.
Thank you, Farida. I would like to focus on something that we didn't talk about very much. We talked about the stick of sanctions a lot. But there are also carrots that are on offer. And I want to remind everybody of that, not just from the United States, from other members of the international community, donors. We stand ready to work with the people of Lebanon and a government of Lebanon that gets it together to the point that you are committed to and able to and in the process of implementing reforms. That's what we need to see. And we desperately need that to stop the bleeding out that we see of money just going into the Mediterranean, basically, every day, flowing out of the country. So let's staunch the flow and then stabilize the economy and get to the point where we can work together and really help rebuild. We want to be a part of the solution.
Thank you very much, Dorothy Shea. Elliott Abrams, with the Biden administration, if they drop the sanctions, what would happen? How would that affect? I know it's not fair. I'm asking too many points here. How would it affect not only the Lebanon policy, but also the Syria policy? And back to the issue of a new JCPOA. Someone is asking me, should a new nuclear agreement also be accompanied by a parallel agreement on regional behavior and security? Could China and Russia be persuaded to be a part of that? I know this is asking too much in a minute and a half.
Yeah,
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
I'll try 1 minute. Thank you, Raya. Look, we think the Biden administration has a great opportunity because there's so much leverage on Iran through the sanctions. Working together, that is the US with France, Germany, the UK, the EU3, working with our friends and partners in the region, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, we have an opportunity together to produce an agreement that actually addresses, yes, the missile question, the regional question, because the problem of Lebanon is partly internal, but it is also the effort by Iran to dominate Lebanon and give itself a border on the Mediterranean and on Israel. If we work together, there is a real opportunity. If we discard the leverage we have, it would really be tragic and foolish. But if we use it, there is a chance, I think, for a constructive agreement that addresses all of these problems.
Will you be playing a role? And let me ask you, are you guys going to help with the transition or not? I mean,
yes.
Shouldn't you be in putting an input in the transition rather than saying, okay, we're not going to recognize you? What do you think?
The transition mechanism began, I think, yesterday. There will be further steps, because we have our holiday of Thanksgiving now, further steps next week. And I look forward to engaging with the transition myself. It would be my third one. So,
who would be your counterpart, Elliott Abrams? Who would you be coordinating with?
Not named. And one of the questions that will be interesting to see, is there a special representative for Iran?
And if there isn't, what would that mean?
It would mean that the Assistant Secretary for the Near East, or perhaps the Secretary or Undersecretary, would take on this portfolio.
With that, I'm going to have to thank you, everybody. And I'm going to quickly announce who are our guests for next week. If we lose electricity, stay put, don't go away, 1 second. Our guest for the 25th E-Policy Circle of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi, they are Ambassador Tom Fletcher. He's now the principal of Hartford College at Oxford University. We have Vance Serchuk. I know that you know him because you were together, my guests, at the first summit in Abu Dhabi a long time ago, 2015, I think it was. So he is now the director of the KKR Global Institute. We have Karim Sajapour, you all know him, he's an Iran expert and he's at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a very good observer of the US-Iranian relations and the reflection of what happens inside Iran on foreign policy. And we have Asli Aydin Tasbas, I hope I'm saying that's right. She is Senior Policy Fellow with the Europe program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Her specialty is Turkey. I thank you. I think, Fouad Makhzoumi, quick word, please. Go ahead.
So far, the sanction has worked, and I think we should continue. I think we should put all the possible opportunities to make sure that we reduce the financing for Hezbollah. I think if we can do that, then we will be weakening the political safety net that was created by Hezbollah after the 2018 elections. I think we will have a much better chance in order to move forward with the reforms.
Thank you, Fouad Makhzoumi. Thank you, Gurvan Le Bras. Thank you, Dorothy Shea. And thank you, Elliott Abrams. I am so grateful that you have honored me by being my guests, and hope to see you at the Real Summit sometime in 2021. Thank you. You have a wonderful evening, morning, and goodbye for now, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.